My girlfriend was up unusually early this morning. I wish I never found out why. I'm going to take out the trash, my girlfriend Monica announced as soon as I entered the kitchen that morning. I hadn't expected to see her up this early. Certainly not after how late she must have gotten home last night. After spending Friday nights bar hopping with friends, Monica usually slept in until lunch. Okay, honey, I said, without particular interest, thanks. Grabbing the cereal box from the counter and plopping down on one of the kitchen chairs, I wondered if she had returned home earlier the previous night and I'd simply missed it. I mean, I normally woke up as soon as I heard the key turning in the lock, but perhaps that night she'd been particularly quiet. Or maybe she'd stayed with one of her friends. How was your night? I asked, as soon as I heard the front door click shut. What time did you get home? Silence. I raised my head from my bowl, waiting for her to emerge from around the corner, but the corridor was empty. Honey, I tried again, my voice saturated with uncertainty. Monica appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She didn't look disoriented or drunk, but she didn't seem quite right either. Her hands were fidgety and her eyes wouldn't meet mine. Monica, I grunted, trying to tame the lump in my throat. What's the matter? She took a deep breath and parted her lips, as though she was going to speak, but then hunched her shoulders and shook her head. I need to take out the trash, she said. I gawked at her, dumbfounded, but you just did. She shook her head and glided towards the trash can cabinet, opening it and producing another bag from within. Then, just like the previous time, she turned on her heel and disappeared from the kitchen. Needless to say, the silent treatment was unlike Monica. Had something happened during her night out? Had I done anything to upset her? And where were all these bags coming from? As soon as I heard the front door shut, I leapt out of my seat and threw the cabinet open, expecting to. Well, I'm not entirely sure what I was expecting. Either way, it was empty. What's going on? I asked, when she returned 5 minutes later, the same empty look in her eyes. Do you want to talk about it? She looked dubious. Monica, okay, she said, but first, let me take out the trash. My stomach lurched as she flung the cabinet open again, pulling out yet another garbage bag. What the hell? I began, subconsciously pinching my arm, as if to ensure I wasn't dreaming. What are all these bags? But she wasn't listening, instead turning her back to me and retreating the same way she had come. A chill crawled up my spine. What the hell was going on? I could have sworn the cabinet had been empty only a few moments ago. Where had all these bags come from and why wasn't she taking them out all at once? Shutting the front door behind me as meticulously as I could, I crept down the hallway leading to the stairwell. I needed to investigate. Monica had never willingly taken out the trash before. She said the garbage chute gave her the creeps. Our apartment was on the 6th floor, so there was no way she was going down all those flights of stairs for a single bag of garbage. The door to the garbage chute at the end of the hallway was ajar, and I could hear the faint wail of metal as it was pulled open. I swallowed, suddenly at a loss for what to do. I mean, wouldn't it be weird if she found me just standing there? And what exactly was I planning to say? I listened in, my skin prickling in anticipation and my heart thudding in my chest. Oh, what was I getting so worked up for? It was only Monica, for God's sake. She'd probably had a falling out with one of her friends, or maybe I was snoring again and she couldn't get to sleep. I'll just go in and but what I saw when I opened the door will remain with me for the rest of my life. Monica was sitting on the door of the chute, her legs already swallowed by the darkness within. Slowly but surely, she was edging her body into it, her palms clammy against the metallic finish. She turned her head at the sound of the door opening, and for a brief moment her eyes lit up with recognition. Monica, I cried out, dashing towards the chute, my heart practically leaping out of my chest. What are you? But it was too late. Startled by my voice, or by my presence, she let go and disappeared into the chute, a raspy wail reverberating against the steel. Thud. I wanted to scream, but it was as though I'd suddenly gone mute. Fear sizzled through me like electricity as I flew down the stairs to the manager's office. Give me the key to the trash room, I demanded breathlessly. My girlfriend is inside. He looked at me over the tops of his glasses, as though questioning my state of mind. That's impossible, he retorted. I have the only key. Tears were flowing freely down my cheeks and my clothes were damp with sweat. I must have looked a downright sight, but I didn't care. She fell into the chute, I sobbed, grabbing the edge of his desk for support. F from the 6th floor. Everything happened quickly after that. An ambulance was called, as were the police. At first they were hesitant to tell me what they'd found. They kept insisting I sit down and have some water, throwing leaflets about therapy and mental well-being into my lap. Please, just tell me, just tell me. I kept repeating, but nobody was listening. Hours seemed to pass by without a single word of affirmation or any information needed to piece the events of the morning together. The ambulance left within about 20 minutes of arrival and left the police to take care of it. I couldn't understand it. I mean, even if Monica was badly hurt, she'd still need to be looked at the hospital. So, why had they left? Eventually, an uneasy-looking officer took a seat next to me. Son, he began slowly, studying my reaction. Your girlfriend is gone. I buried my face in my hands. Of course, she was. She jumped down the fucking chute, plummeting God knows how many feet. But your story isn't quite adding up. He continued, his eyes narrowing. You said she'd fallen into the chute, but... He took a deep breath, his forehead creasing. But we found her. Well, parts of her. Inside a garbage bag. My blood ran cold. It was like I could no longer understand what he was saying. His mouth was moving, but the sounds were jumbled and wouldn't make sense. Inside a garbage bag. What the hell was that supposed to mean? He explained that the garbage bag had been there for at least several hours before the police were called. He said that there was no doubt that its contents belonged to Monica. He asked whether I had any idea what happened. Then, in a much softer tone, he added that I'd be expected to come in for questioning. When I finally returned to my apartment that morning, all I wanted to do was fall into bed and go to sleep, praying I'd wake up to discover that all this had been nothing but a bad dream. But as soon as I entered the bedroom, the front door slammed shut. "Hello," I called out, my voice meek and croaky. Silence. A newfound sense of dread filled my lungs as I recalled the events of the morning. As I tiptoed slowly towards the kitchen, I couldn't help wondering if... No, it couldn't be. She was leaning over the trash can cabinet, a new garbage bag in her grasp. She spun around and our eyes met. "I'm just going to take out the trash," she said. I stared at her, my breath catching in my throat. Here she was, right in front of me, talking about trash as if it were the most casual thing in the world. In a feeble attempt to make her stay, I asked the only question I could think of. I asked it, even though I knew the answer already. What's in the bag, honey?
Upstairs neighbor decided to complain about the noise we weren't making. Long story short, our upstairs neighbor let her boyfriend move in with her. He seems to be at most about 18 years old, and every single night since he moved in he has either called the cops or complained to the landlord that we were making too much noise. Mind you, most of the times of these complaints we were all literally asleep. So we decided to start filing noise complaints back as they are much louder and constantly waking our toddler up. We tried our best to keep the noise down, but we have never been that loud, and the prior tenants never had an issue with us, and neither did the woman upstairs till her boyfriend moved in. Yesterday was the final straw. Our landlord told us to let him know if their dogs were making too much noise. After listening to their dog yip for 3 hours straight, I decided to say something. Lo and behold, about 20 minutes later the cops are at my door, saying there was a complaint my child had been crying for hours. Mind you, my child hadn't cried all day. So they asked to see my daughter. I show them my toddler, who is content and has not been crying at all, and they go on their way. Moments later, boyfriend upstairs comes stomping as loud as he can inside, saying, "You wanna say that I make too much noise?" and yelling and swearing at us through the floor. We made countless attempts to get him to come downstairs, but he refuses and begins blasting music as loud as he can. We record all of this and send it to our landlord, and then decided to be petty. We get our toddler away from the loudness. My boyfriend is very into music and audio production, and so we have a high quality and loud sound system. We proceed to play music as loud as we can once our baby is protected from the sound, which very much drowned out what he was playing. After we stopped, he was silent, and his girlfriend shortly after got home and commenced screaming at him for being how he was. He is very abusive toward her, and we can hear him screaming and throwing things at her all the time. The dude is an overall piece of poop. The icing on the cake is that today the landlord is coming over to tell him that he needs to move out ASAP and is no longer allowed on the property. Overall, a huge win for us.
If this ever happens, don't answer the door, hide, lock everything, and never look into their eyes. I know that this sounds like the kind of advice to anyone left alone in the house at night, but this is different. It started a week ago. I was in bed, it had just turned 1 o'clock. I was scrolling on my phone while my wife Steph was asleep. I suddenly had a notification pop up at the top of my phone. Anyone with a video doorbell will be accustomed to this. Motion detected. I normally ignore it as it was either a car coming down the road or a person stumbling back home after a night out. Then the doorbell chimed. The notification followed. There is a person at your front door. I opened the app. There sure enough was a young woman standing, clinging onto my door frame. I answered, "Hello, can I help you?" She came back immediately. "Please let me in, someone is chasing me." I told her to stay where she was and I would call the police. I heard her again. "Please let me in. He's going to hurt me, please hurry." At this point my wife woke up. She asked me what I was doing. As I put some clothes on ready to go downstairs, I said there was a woman at our door begging to come in as someone was chasing her. I was about to dial for the police when Steph opened the app. She said, "Babe, no one is there." We looked back on the motion history. Both notifications were logged. I opened the first one, nothing but our front porch. I proceeded to the other notification, where someone had pressed the doorbell. There was my front porch, shrouded in darkness, but this time we could hear only my voice. Of course there was no response to my questions. I thought to myself, was I going crazy? My wife said it was late. I must have been half asleep and my mind was playing tricks on me. Even if that was right, it still didn't explain why we got the notifications. The next night we both sat binging a Netflix show in our living room. We must have lost track of time as it was nearly 1 in the morning. I went to check the back door was locked when my phone buzzed. I asked Steph whether she had the same. She had. I opened the app just as it notified me that someone had pressed the bell. We both quickly opened the live view. Stood at our door, a child. The young boy must have been no older than 8. The camera was in night vision, which was black and white. The boy's face glowed, eyes piercing through my screen. I once again answered, "Hello, can I help?" The kid looked up at the camera. "Hi, my daddy broke down just up the road and his phone is dead. Can you please let me in? I need to use your phone." Me and Steph looked at each other. She shook her head at me. I replied to him, "I can call someone out for you, or maybe the police can help." The boy then seemed to turn. His voice now had anger to it. "Open the door, I need help. Are you really going to let me stay out here all alone?" His story had changed. I went back after swallowing my own fear. "Stay there, I will get help." This time I called the police. They came around 20 minutes later. By this point no one was around. We had seen the boy walk off around the corner 5 minutes after I had got off the phone. The officers checked our road and the surrounding area. They found no people, not even the odd car driving around. We both tried to show them the app, but obviously, there was nothing there. The two officers were understanding and seemed to believe us. They gave us the department's direct number and told us to call them if anything happens again. We went to bed that night scared and confused. We didn't understand what or why this was happening to us. The next day we decided to get an early night. We made sure everything was locked and the house secure. We both fell asleep early. I was woken up at just gone 1 o'clock to the sound of 2 sets of buzzing from my phone. I ignored these. I just rolled over and went back to sleep. When I looked at my phone in the morning, I opened up the doorbell app. The video playback showed nothing, but I could hear scratching for about 2 to 3 seconds after the apparent press of the bell. I went downstairs and checked the door. 3 sets of 4 deep scratches went down my front door. The anxiety hit me like a tidal wave going throughout my body. I now fear the night ahead of us. 2 nights ago we both had decided to stay up. We were going to put an end to this. We were on edge in our own home and it just wasn't right. The minutes drew closer to that damned time, 1 o'clock. Then right on schedule, the notifications started. I opened the app. Now stood there, one of the policemen. He was one of the officers that was with us the other night. I thought it was strange. It caught me off guard. Steph said that she will look out the window upstairs. We had both said earlier that one of us would look out the window to confirm if someone really was there. I answered the door. "Hello, officer. Can I help you?" He looked into the camera. "We have an update on the problem you have been having. Can you please open the door?" I felt a sense of confliction come over me. This didn't feel right. I had watched enough police programs and dramas to know they usually have to report to places with another officer. The lack of any police cars also unnerved me. "Sorry, officer. I'm sure you can understand the reluctancy to open the door due to our situation." He snapped back. "It's fine. I am an officer of the law and instructing you to please open up. I need to come in and update you." Now I knew something was wrong. His whole demeanor was now completely different to when we spoke 2 nights ago. I watched as his head looked upwards. I heard my wife scream the words, "Oh my God." His eyes. What the fuck? I rushed up the stairs, my feet slipping as I ran. I saw Steph, but she looked petrified. She stared at me blankly and said, "You need to let him in. He will help us." I uttered back, struggling to catch my breath. "We can't. You know we can't." "What did you see? What was wrong with his eyes?" She tilted her head at me, her eyes began to roll upwards. "Let him in. Let him in." Her tone started to change. It was turning into a gravelly, rasping voice. Her face now full of anger as she screamed at me. "Let him in now." I grabbed her and shook her while shouting, "Steph, listen to me. Snap out of it." She looked back at me, dazed and confused. She said wearily, with tears in her eyes, "I want to go to bed." I said, "Only if you are okay." She said she was fine and didn't know what happened. I checked the video feed once more. No one was there. It took me a few hours to fall asleep worrying about what happened to Steph. When I woke the next morning, Steph was gone. Her phone and jewelry left on the bedside cabinet. I went downstairs and searched for her, but nothing. She wasn't in the house. I called the police department on the number I was given. I spoke to the partner of the policeman that was at my door. I told him everything that happened and that my wife had gone missing. They told me the officer that was stood at my door 8 hours earlier was on leave. He flew out on holiday yesterday morning. It couldn't have been him. In the hours ahead, a search team was assembled and I joined them in searching the local area. There was no sign of her. It's now 11 p.m. I'm sitting alone in my living room, my head now full of fear and radiating pain. I just want my Steph home. I just want normality back. Here it comes, 12:59. 3, 2, 1 o'clock. The notifications came through. I opened the app. Steph was at the front door. I was almost half expecting it. I said, "Where were you, honey?" She looked into the camera. "I was taken, but I escaped and I'm here now. Let me in and I will tell you all about it." I took a deep sigh. "Okay, I will be there in a minute, babe. What can I do? She is my wife. I have nothing without her." I wrote all of this throughout this evening, hoping for some sort of closure, maybe even a happy ending to this horrible experience. I guess now it will just be a piece of evidence on what happened to us both. I need to go answer the door now. My wife is home.
You'll never even know. Surveillance is a growing fact of life these days, but I now believe we've expanded the scope of human sight to dangerous levels. I'm not a master hacker by any means, but I was able to Google a script to break into my neighbor's new smart home system. Believe me when I say that ignorance is bliss and that you can never go back once you know the truth. I'm not some creep. The idea first started as a random thought when I heard my 50-something neighbor bragging to someone else on his porch about his new smart home system. He claimed the security system and all the devices in his house were wired to the same voice command box, and he sounded rather proud of it. He claimed it was perfect security. Of course, after overhearing a claim like that floating in through my open window, I made a single search and found a dozen hits for scripts that would break into the brand he described. I laughed to myself and then left it at that. But temptation has a funny way of lurking in the back of your mind. Every few days the thought would randomly pop into my head, I had the power. Why not take a peek? It would be good for a laugh if nothing else. It's not like he would have installed cameras in his bathrooms or anything. Nah,
No. Maybe, no, I shouldn't. But then spring break arrived, and, while sitting at my computer, I happened to glance out the window and see the neighbor's daughter coming home from college. The temptation to use the script had already been percolating in me for weeks. The veins in my extremities constricted painfully as I realized I was going to do it. During my brief glimpse down into their yard, I'd seen what looked like a startlingly attractive girl, and I couldn't connect that image to the weird girl next door I'd last seen in high school. It wasn't a creeper thing. I just wanted a better look to understand what I'd seen. I told myself I'd take one quick look and then be done with it. While loading up the script, I promised myself I'd delete it right after. Yeah, that was the right thing to do. No harm was done, and if I got caught somehow, I could just claim it was a one-time accident. That sounded reasonable. A black window scrolled text down my screen rapidly for 6 seconds, and then, I was in. Nerves thrilling, I watched breathlessly through a security cam feed in the living room as the girl came in, greeted her brother and father, and then headed upstairs. It was the same girl I remembered, and she'd gotten absurdly pretty in the last year somehow. After settling into certainty, I closed the feed, deleted the script, and then spent a paranoid hour clearing my computer of any evidence of what I'd done. For maybe a week I sat at home terrified that the police would break down my door and take me at any moment. But that's the funny thing about temptation. When no consequences followed, the urge to look began eating away at me again. I had a few drinks one lonely night and then went for it before I could change my mind. The son was watching television in the living room. I couldn't see what he was watching from the angle of the camera in the living room, but he seemed zoned out. My neighbor himself was sitting in the kitchen working on his laptop. Again, I couldn't see what he was doing from my angle, but he was certainly downing coffee as he worked. My pulse quickened as a hallway feed caught the daughter going from her room to the bathroom and just a towel to take a shower. Okay, borderline creeps, I told myself, but it's not like I could see in the bathrooms or the bedrooms, right? Just to confirm that I couldn't, I tried the various devices around the house that the neighbor had connected to his system. Most were named with random numbers and letters, but I did find that household devices had many more sensors than we gave them credit for. A microwave in the kitchen had some sort of crude light sensor, and the system sent me its data as an incredibly blurry video feed. A big blob of darkness moved in place in front of a bright rectangle of light, and I realized I was looking at my neighbor on his laptop from a different angle. Many devices in the house had crude light sensors or audio pickups, and I could hear the shower running upstairs on one while listening to the sun show on another. This was all proceeding as one might expect, and I might have gone down a very dark path if I hadn't stumbled upon the unthinkable. One of the devices with a very long and very random name showed me a blurry feed somewhere unrecognizable. I switched back and forth comparing the patterns of light from the cameras, but this device seemed to be looking out somewhere altogether different. Was it the basement? It was darker than the others, but not too dark to obscure strange gray blurs moving on black. I kept switching until I found a security camera near a basement window. It was the only one down there, but it showed enough that I could compare blurs. It was less than the objects were moving and more that the fuzzy sensor made the objects appear to move simply because it was so bad, but I pinpointed a poster, a chair, and a mirror before coming to an impasse with the final blur. This one I could only see this one on the sensor. There was nothing on the video feed. Peering closer and closer, I tried to make sense of the blob of gray and white pixels as it moved around the basement. There, and there, recognizable landmarks among the junk, but no sign of it on the high-res camera. What was I seeing? Was the sensor just defective? What device was it even part of? I managed to narrow it down to a forgotten digital clock that must have been running on batteries, but nothing about this made sense. I looked up a script to sharpen video data and I let everything run all night. In the morning, I pulled myself up, got a coffee, sat down at my computer, and then froze. Repeatedly, I played the confusing horror the script had produced. The blur of gray and shadows had become coherent, but not in any natural way. Instead, it appeared that I was looking at an androgynous gray humanoid form with a pillowcase over her head. Since this was just a graphical best guess, her glitchy movement brought out severe unease and disgust in me as I watched her jerkily walk around the basement. She appeared to be able to navigate despite the pillowcase covering her face, and she even made it up a few steps toward the basement door before her random movements took her back down. What the hell was I seeing? For 2 days I watched the thing stumble around my neighbor's basement before she finally went all the way up the stairs. It was 4 in the morning and all of 3 of them were asleep. This time, she seemed to move with purpose. She was still not visible on any high-resolution camera, but I tracked her from the sensor to the sensor by her twitching blur. After so long watching her unfocused form, I was beginning to get a sense of where her legs and arms were by the movement and patterns of the gray. Each limb moved as if on different conflicting joints. When she walked, it was as if her ankles, knees, and thighs each wanted to go in opposite directions, and the conflict was only resolved by odd rotations and strange body angles. Gripped by terror, I watched her slowly ratchet her way through the kitchen and toward the second set of stairs. There was no doubt in my mind that she was heading for the bedrooms. My knuckles went white as I gripped the edge of my table. Finally, as she clambered up and out of sight of the sensors, I panicked. She still wasn't visible on the hallway camera, but I knew I had to do something. But what? If I called the house, they would have my phone number, and they would start asking questions as to why I'd called at 4 in the morning. There was no way I could pretend it was random. The only reason I even had my neighbor's cell phone number was that I'd heard him say it out loud the week before on one of my feeds. What could I do? Desperate to act, or to at least see what was happening, I left my computer and crept to a window in another room. From here, I could see into my neighbor's daughter's window, and my entire body ran with prickly terror as I spied a strange gray anti-glow in her room. The sharpening script had not been wrong, it had merely been inadequate. My eyes still interpreted the inexplicable entity as an androgynous humanoid with a pillowcase over its head, but it moved through the space of the girl's room like a depressed carving etched into reality itself. I could feel why it didn't show up on cameras. It was something otherworldly, something not entirely there, or something visible only as an artifact of organic human perception. This was a creature outside the realm of human knowledge and observation, and I guessed that it was making its move now only because it believed itself to be unseen. It jerked and twitched forward to lean over the neighbor's daughter as she slept. Quickly and quietly, I slid open my window, removed the screen, and threw a quarter at the glass panes opposite. I ducked down immediately after and clutched the floor in abject terror. The rap noise had been excruciatingly loud. Had the entity snapped its pillowcase-covered head toward the sound? Had it seen me? I had no way of knowing. Or did I? Crawling back to my room, I checked the feeds. Completely unperturbed by my noise, the entity had begun ratcheting her way back down the stairs. It was not fleeing to the basement. I watched as it approached the small table by the front door and began going through the mail stack there. It carefully picked out one envelope and crumpled it into oblivion in a blurry gray hand. Then, it moved to the kitchen, where it touched the keyboard on my neighbor's laptop repeatedly for nearly a minute. What was it doing? It returned to the basement to move in lurking circles, and I sat and stared at it half awake until a shout from both my computer and my open window jolted me to full awareness. It had been my neighbor in his kitchen. He'd yelled loud enough for me to hear it for real. Stalking back and forth while talking on the phone, he was insisting he hadn't sent any compromising emails. He'd been fired from his job. In the front hall, his son was busy looking through the pile of mail. He asked his sister and father repeatedly if any college acceptance letters had come in, but his father was too busy arguing on the phone, and his sister hadn't seen any. But I had. What type of entity were we dealing with here? It hadn't physically harmed anyone, but it was still lurking in their home every hour of every day, and it had made invisible moves against them by sabotaging my neighbor's job and his son's college career. At long last, my neighbor seemed to convince the other end that his account had been hacked, but he was somber and concerned about how it would reflect on him at work. The son continued with his day, oblivious to the fact that his acceptance letter had come in and been destroyed. It was then that I began to think about the timeline of what had happened. I'd resisted the urge to spy on my neighbor's family for weeks. Indeed, beyond that, he'd lived there for years. If the entity had been in his basement this entire time, then perhaps they were not physically at risk. There'd been plenty of opportunities to hurt them directly. No, this was something else. This was a specter of misfortune, a curse, an information parasite. But my neighbor had not been particularly unlucky as far as I knew, not until he'd gotten the surveillance system. A bunch of little complaints I'd heard him make suddenly began to add up. Things had been inexplicably going wrong for everyone in his family recently. Alarm clocks had been failing to go off at the proper time, emails and texts had been a bit weird, and each of the 3 members of his household had a general growing frustration with life. It was undermining them. It was lurking in the basement, looking out of sight, and sabotaging them, and they had no idea. But where had the entity come from? Almost all of the devices and cameras had been there before. The only difference was that they had been integrated. Did observation affect the physical universe? I was no quantum physics expert, but I knew that observation was a crucial part of existence. Did overlapping connected layers of observation somehow enable this entity to slide into our world? When you put all the pieces together, did the whole add up to more than the sum of the parts? I began thinking up a plan of action that involved sneaking over there and turning off all their devices in the hopes of banishing the entity in their basement. But, as I did so, I looked down and to the left of my cell phone. It sat quietly glowing on the table, for I had moved my hand above it and activated its motion sensor. Then, I looked up and noticed the webcam above my monitor that I always kept pointed at myself. Then, I looked to my right at my television, itself containing a sensor, and the gaming console beside it that also had sensors to detect my motion. Microphones. Cameras. Everywhere. I'd applied for so many internships last summer and gotten none. I'd missed dates and lost budding relationships because of texting troubles. Everything had felt hard lately, thus why I was sitting alone at my computer most nights. I sat without breathing for nearly 20 seconds. There would be no plan. There would be no action taken. My neighbors would have to fend for themselves. I let out my breath, put my hands back on my mouse and keyboard, and loaded up a computer game. It would look like I'd given up, to anyone watching. Attention shoppers, please hide at the back of the store immediately. Attention shoppers, came a male voice over the intercom. Please move to the back of the store immediately. The back of the store? I whispered to Daniel. Don't they mean the front of the store? To pay for our stuff? It was 8:50 p.m., 10 minutes till closing time. We brought our 2 kids out on this late-night Walmart excursion in the hopes of burning off some energy. Instead, they'd just thrown tantrums for new Legos and Hot Wheels. It was a disaster. But apparently, the disaster was just beginning. Please move to the back of the store immediately, the voice repeated overhead. This is not a drill. I glanced around, but the other shoppers were just as confused as I was. An old lady looked up at the ceiling, scrunching her face. What the hell? A dark-haired woman asked her boyfriend, pushing a cart full of garden supplies. Didn't you hear? An older man said, leaning over his cart of bottled water and canned food. We're in a tornado watch. 1 touchdown in Somerville. A tornado? It was storming outside. I'd seen the black clouds roll in from the east earlier. But it didn't look that bad. Do not stay out in the open. I repeat, do not stay out in the open. There was a pause. Then, an explosion of sound, as everyone began to mobilize. Carts rolling, panicked voices, feet slapping on the floor. No. This can't be happening. I hurried down the toy aisle, Tucker in my arms, Daniel and Jackson following me. 3 zigzaggy turns, and then we were in the electronics area. I glanced at the TVs on the wall, and pictured the 4 of us, crushed underneath them. Stay away from windows and doors, the voice continued on the loudspeaker. And do not attempt to exit the store. Is it safe here? Daniel shook his head. Big open areas aren't good. I'm going to check in back and see if there's a break room or something. You stay here, okay? I nodded. Arms shaking, I sat down on the ground between 2 shelves of video games. Tucker sucked on a bottle in my arms while Jackson began to giggle. Is the tornado going to hit the store? And everything will fly around, real fast? He asked with a big stupid grin on his face. I don't know. A tornado. A real-life tornado, like you, sees in the movies, plowing through our town. It was so unfathomable. We were New York natives, transplanted here to Indiana only 6 months ago. I'd never been in a tornado watch my entire life. Daniel jogged back into view. Everything's locked up, he said, as he joined me on the floor. But listen, Fairview's a big town. The chances that it'll hit this Walmart. I think we'll be okay. I never should have brought us here. You didn't know. None of us did. He wrapped his arm around me. They should have warned us. Like an emergency alert on our phones. Or a tornado siren, or something. The voice overhead rang out again through the store. Do not stay out in the open. Do not make yourself visible. That includes security cameras. Please move to a spot that is not visible to any cameras. I frowned. What does that have to do with tornadoes? A feeling of unease, in the pit of my stomach. I glanced up, and saw several black globes descending from the ceiling, hiding the cameras within. I guess we should listen to them and get out of sight, I whispered. I grabbed Jackson's hand, Daniel picked up Tucker, and we jogged out into the center aisle. The store was an eerie sight, abandoned shopping carts, askew in the aisle, full of everything from pies to batteries to plants. Footsteps echoed around the store from people unseen, as they found their new hiding places. We dodged a shopping cart full of soda, ran through kitchenware, and then stopped in the Easter decoration aisle. There was a camera in the central corridor, but as long as we stayed in the middle of the Easter aisle, we'd be invisible. The four of us crouched on the floor, next to some demented-looking Easter bunnies. I'm hungry, Jackson whined. Shh, Mommy. I grabbed a bag of colorful chocolate eggs and ripped it open. Here, candy. Happy? I whispered, thrusting them into his hands. Then I leaned back against the metal shelves, panting. But I didn't have long to rest. A mechanical whine overhead, and then the voice came through the speakers again. Keep away from aisles with food. If you have food with you, leave it and move to a new hiding place. If you have any open wounds, cover them with clothing. What? The duck? That had nothing to do with keeping safe in a tornado. We should make a run for it, Daniel whispered to me, starting to stand. But, the tornado. I don't think there is a tornado. Listen, do you hear any wind? I listened, but all I heard was silence. No howling wind, no shaking ground, and no projectiles clanging against the metal roof. Maybe it's still coming. I know what they're saying doesn't make sense, but to go outside. We need to get out of here. Now. He grabbed Jackson's hand as he held Tucker in his arms. Come on. Daniel, I don't think that's a good idea, I whispered. But the next words from the intercom changed my mind. Assume a fetal position and place your hands on your head. Close your eyes and do not open them for any reason. Let's go. We broke into a sprint and ran down the central aisle, cameras be damned. The front door appeared in front of us, a little black rectangle looming in the distance. And as we got closer, I saw Daniel was right. There was a tree at the border of the parking lot, under a street lamp. It was perfectly still. We continued running, past the clothing area, past the snacks lined up at the checkout lines. I ran towards the sliding glass doors as fast as my legs would carry me. Almost there. Almost there. Almost. The doors didn't open. No. Daniel slammed his body against the door. It rattled underneath him. I tried to squeeze my fingers into the gap between them, to try and pull them apart. They didn't budge. They locked us in, I whispered. I want to go home, Jackson said. Tucker was beginning to fuss too, making little noises like he was about to start full-on wailing. I turned around. And that's when I saw him. A Walmart employee. He was sitting on the ground at the end of one of the checkout aisles, facing away from us, wearing the familiar blue vest with a golden starburst. Hey, let us out. He didn't reply. Did you hear me? I don't care if there's an effing tornado. Unlock the door and let us out. Again, he said nothing. But in the silence, I could hear something. A wet, smacking sound. I stared at the man, slightly hunched over, still facing away from me. Was he eating something? The speaker overhead crackled to life. Attention. Please do not talk to any Walmart employees. My blood ran cold. The smacking sound stopped. And then, slowly, the man began to stand. He placed his palms on the conveyor belt and pushed up, and I could see that they were stained with blood. I backed away, but my legs felt like they were moving through a vat of honey. No. Fingers locked around my arm and yanked. Come on, Daniel shouted. I sprinted after him, deeper into the store. Tucker stared at me over his shoulder, and Jackson ran as fast as his little feet would take him. I was vaguely aware of the slap sound behind me, but I didn't dare look back. Daniel ran into the clothing area and I swayed, dodging circular racks of t-shirts and wooden displays of baby clothes. He skidded to a stop and ducked into the dressing room area. In here, he whispered, motioning at one of the rooms. We piled inside and locked the door. Daddy, Jackson started. You listen to me very carefully, I said, crouching to his level. You have to be silent. Do not say a word. Okay? Jackson looked at me, then Daniel, then he nodded and sat down on the floor. I'm going to try to call 911, Daniel whispered, transferring Tucker to me and pulling out his phone. He tapped at the screen, then frowned. What? We don't seem to have any service. I don't. Thump. I grabbed Jackson and pulled him away from the door. The four of us huddled in the corner. I held my breath. Thump. Under the gap of the dressing room door, men's feet in black shoes. They slowly took a step forward, deeper into the dressing room. Don't move, I whispered, holding Jackson. The man took another step. Don't make a sound. Don't move. Don't. Tucker let out a soft cry. The man stopped. His feet turned, pointing at us. No. Tucker let out another cry, louder this time. My nails dug into Daniel's hand. No. A hand appeared. It slowly pressed against the floor, stained with blood. And then his knees appeared, as he lowered himself down to the gap. No. Could he fit under? The gap wasn't small, it was like the stall door to a bathroom. If he flattened himself against the floor, there's a chance he could fit under. I watched in horror as his stomach came into view. His blue Walmart vest, as he lowered his body to the floor. as if feeling for us. This is it. We're going to die. And then he lowered his head. His face. Oh, God, there was something horribly wrong with his face. He smiled up at us with an impossibly wide smile, showing off bloodstained teeth. His skin was so pale it was nearly blue. And his eyes. They were milky white, without pupils or irises. I opened my mouth to scream. Attention shoppers, the voice began overhead. No, no, no. Please make your way to the front of the store and make your final purchases. We will be closing in 10 minutes. What? And then, before I could react, something unseen jerked the man out of view. A strange dragging sound followed, as if someone was dragging his body out of the dressing room area. I stared at the door, shaking, as Tucker's cries rang in my ears. But he didn't come back. And within 10 minutes, the usual hubbub of Walmart returned. Voices. Footsteps. Shopping cart wheels roll along the floor. Shaking, I finally got up and unlocked the door. The store looked completely normal. People were lined up at the cash registers, placing their goods on the conveyor belts. Employees were scanning tags, printing receipts. People walked towards the glass doors, and when they did, they slid open. As we slowly walked towards the exit, I spotted the older man who'd warned us about the tornado earlier. What was that? I asked, unable to keep my voice from shaking. He shrugged. I guess the tornado missed us. What a miracle, huh? Smiling at us, he disappeared out the glass doors and into the night.